Hi everybody, I'm recording an Oculus Quest 2 video to help people with IL2 get set up. Starting off by recording in the headset only, not connected to the PC, just to go through some settings on here. Not sure what the quality of this video will look like. I've never really messed with videos on here, and I'm not even sure I'm going to get the video out of here because sharing it's kind of a mess. I'll probably just try to see if I can copy it over the USB cable, so we'll see how that goes. I'm using the new quick menu, universal menu settings. So if yours looks different than this, your settings are probably elsewhere, but in here, before I would start Oculus Link, I would set up my room space, make sure everything's good and my tracking is good. I'd go into settings here by hitting quick settings, and then I have everything. I'll turn my sound up. I'll make sure my microphone is on because I record video, and then I'll hit reset view this way. And I'm using the left hand. Even with my right hand, I use the left hand because of SteamVR. SteamVR, the options button, the hamburger here, the three little hamburger options button on the lower thing, that's the button that's not raised. That button switches back and forth between your game and your desktop, so it only does that on the left controller, so frequently that's the controller I'll use. One thing I really love about the Oculus controllers is you just pick them up and they become active and they go inactive. There's no going to sleep and taking out a game. SteamVR mixed reality game hand controllers, when they disappear, sometimes they take focus off the game, and sometimes when you turn them back on, they kill. They launch mixed reality, and that'll kill SteamVR. So those going to sleep can be a real hassle. No problems with that at all with Oculus. Okay, so we've got our microphone, we've got our sound. You got Oculus Link here, you can see it. You want to make sure your network's good if you're using AirLink. We'll talk about that later. Usually I'll just set that up anyway. I'll just turn it off and on so it connects to the mesh router in the room, because I may be in different rooms. My recording says it's yellow. I wonder if that means my recording's gone away. Now my recording's gone. Maybe because it streams the recording. Anyway, it's recording now. Okay, so we got a good connection. To reset the view, I'll use this to reset the view rather than the right controller's thumb button. And you just click it and look straight ahead and level, natural. You don't have to actually hit the button, though you see a button out there. You can just look natural and pull the trigger. And then my view's set. For Guardian Space, when I set it up, I like to set up, you can't see that if I show you, but I like to use the wand to make draw a little line coming right down the center towards me before I trace the room in front of that, so that there's a line going off into the distance that lines my sim seat, and I find that helpful, and it remembers that. The precision of the Oculus tracking and the room tracking of it and it remembering it is way better than mixed reality. And just the tracking in general is better than mixed reality. When you set your room space and you center it sitting in the seat, and then you launch SteamVR, the two worlds align perfectly. There's no need to recenter. It's pretty impressive in that regard, much more so than mixed reality's tracking. Okay, so we've got our tracking set up, we've got everything going, and just a few quick settings here. I'm going to go to settings. In the device, you can turn on and off your tracking here. Frequently, that's super handy to turn off your tracking if you're going to use your Oculus in bed at night, because tracking needs light, and at night, you can go into 3-off mode, and then you can watch movies or do whatever you want to do easily browsing. I set mine instead of auto to tracking to the outlets here are 60 hertz, so I figure that's a little bit better in mixed lighting conditions. I don't want to getting confused and losing tracking. Under experimental, I do not use 120. Sometimes I go back and forth and play with it. My fitness apps, I think the fitness apps get a little overwhelmed by 120, even though they may look smoother. They may not keep up with my punches and things like that. So I like, so far I'm working with the 90 hertz and, the regular refresh rate, and I may play around with 120 more. We'll see how that goes. AirLink, here's how you turn it on in here. You have to turn it on. I'll show you where to turn that on the desktop as well. Before you can use that, we'll play with that later. If you do want to use this in bed at night, you can hook up a Bluetooth mouse and keyboard. And the Bluetooth mouse and keyboard will pair. You can pair a Bluetooth headset to it for earphones, better earphones that nobody else can hear. Amazing for working in bed, typing emails, surfing the web, YouTube, watching Netflix, all kinds of stuff. You can bring your couch into VR. You can bring your desk into VR. And then when you do, it'll actually carve out a space where you can see your keyboard automatically with the cameras. It's pretty cool. Most of that I don't do. I do the work in bed. And I don't use Airlink for that. I use Virtual Desktop, and it's an amazing app. The only reason I wouldn't use that for IL2 is it somehow distorts the gauges. It used to work a long time ago, and then it got worse. So Airlink is not quite as good, and the intuitive controls of Virtual Desktop are amazing for moving the desktop around and zooming in and out. I read manga with it. I do all kinds of things with it. But Airlink is working pretty good for IL2, so can't complain about that. Now, I guess we're set up here, so with that, we're going to get back to experimental features later. Right now, we're just going to use the Oculus Link. I'm going to launch Oculus Link from here. Every time I do, I make sure I center the room right before I go. So we'll launch Oculus Link, and you'll see it launch. And then I'm going to probably kill this video shortly thereafter and switch over to desktop recording. And we'll see how that goes. So we're launching. You should see what I see in here. Now, before I kill this, I'm in the desktop. First thing I do is I go and I find the desktop. You can point your controller at it and it'll read it. I never ever use these homes of any of the different systems. They're terrible. I like just working from my desktop in VR. So here's the desktop. Click on it. Now I can see my desktop. All right. Good time to probably switch over. I'm going to start recording the desktop instead of using this view. All right, so I'll restart again in a little bit, getting it from that view. Thanks. The desktop, I'll go back to that other view in a little bit. I want to go over Oculus settings now, and then we'll pretend we're restarting that. So I'm actually obviously in Oculus Link. That's how I'm looking at the desk and recording this. I'm recording it with my headset on. But let's go ahead and go through the settings as if we hadn't started up yet. So in the Oculus app, you're going to want to start this Oculus app first. And when you do, you're going to set some things in it. If you're going to use Airlink, you're going to have to go to Settings, Beta, and enable that here. And if you may need to re-enable that once in a while, especially if you restart the service and make changes, and we'll get back to that. Under Devices, you're going to click on your Oculus that you've already hooked up and set up, and then you're going to go down to the settings. So you can click different parts in here to get different things that you want to learn about or set up. Click the very top to set up the microphones and sound and resolution. So go to Advanced here under Resolution and set this to 1. Even if you're using some other setting right now, just try this and let me know how it works, because for me, setting this to 1 and controlling this elsewhere works perfectly. I'm only using 72 hertz because I don't have the most powerful computer on the planet right now. I'm going to upgrade to a powerful new computer shortly, but they're actually delayed 2 weeks behind what they thought. So there's a backlog. So yeah, 1 and 72. Okay. And then that's pretty much all you set up in here. You'll never touch that again as far as using Link or Airlink. You may go into settings here, beta, and mess with the Airlink, and we'll get back to that later. Once that's started and running, then you can put on your headset up, do everything we talked about, set up your room space, plug in your USB cable, and click to join, and it'll join. You'll see as soon as you plug in the cable, you'll see that Oculus Link is enabled in that setting. So now we want to talk about the Oculus Debug tool. The Oculus Debug tool is under, I believe it's under, let's just find it real quick. Not very professional of me not to have it all set up and know where I'm going, but that's all right. It's going to be a little bit rambling. Sorry if it's too long. I'll put in shortcuts in the YouTube video. Okay, so Oculus software, probably under programs, Oculus. And then I believe software, or maybe support, actually. Support, Oculus Runtime, the Oculus Debug tool. In one of these folders is the Oculus Debug tool. Could have sworn it was in here. All right, bad on me. Pausing the recorder. Recording it. Just hovered my mouse, so it's under Oculus support, Oculus diagnostics, and you can make a shortcut to it. The Oculus debug tool you will use just about every time you want to use this headset to play IL2 or something else on the computer. This is how you control the resolution and everything else about the recording. So this first value is the most important one, and you can see the quality shift there in the recording just as I hit this. 0 or 1 are the same thing, and that's just its default value. That's the normal resolution, and then it's just a multiplier, just like SteamVR has a multiplier. You won't be using the SteamVR multiplier with this. You'll use this instead. So going from the top down, that's the most important one you're going to do to set your resolution. On a 1080 Ti for IL2, I run it at 1.255, and you can see it changes the resolution on the fly. So if I change this to 2, everything gets more sharp. It gets sharper off in the distance. Let's set it to 0, and you can see, look at the grid there as I set it to 2, and it's quite a bit sharper. Even though I'm only recording this at 1080p, it's sampling it better, so it should resolve better in the video. All right, so I'm going to set it to 1.255 because that's my setting for IL2. Going down the list here, you don't really have to set anything else till you get to proximity check, and you can set this to on, and then it will bypass it. So if you take the headset off, it won't automatically turn off. The next setting, and you're going to have to set this every time you rejoin Oculus Link, is you got to open this and you've got to turn this off. It'll remember your settings for these other things, but this one you've got to disable if you want to disable asynchronous time warping that Oculus does. It does a pretty good job, but the artifacts for me, no matter what, are no good in flying and dogfighting. Little planes not doing what they're supposed to do is not good for me. So I turn off that, and actually it gives you a little bit of a performance boost, though obviously it makes it less smooth if it's not projecting as well. It is doing projection anyway, it's just not doing made up frames in between. So I disable that every time, and you have to disable this before you start SteamVR or your game, okay? Then this distortion curvature is where you want your detail focused. It has a default value, and that's the way the headset normally renders. If you put it on high, it will focus more, rendering towards the center of the image. And if you put it on low, it'll even it out more and make the outsides a little more detailed than they are normally. I want the center to be as sharp as possible, and I will turn my head. So it's always a trade-off. Each of these things is a trade-off. So for me, maximum detail in the center is what I'm going for in these current headsets with the horsepower I've got. So this next setting, encode resolution width. 3696 is where I set it to, and that corresponds to a value of 2. So if you set this to 2.0, which is the max I go for testing and playing, that's 3696 pixels horizontally per eye. Going above that, getting near 4000, and it started to have weird image issues. So I limited it to this. And for Oculus Link, it's fine. But at AirLink, if you start going above this values and high in these override values, and you start to have issues. I leave this dynamic bitrate disabled and the dynamic rate max obviously disabled because I'm just fixed encoding at 300 megabits per second. My cable's good enough for it. My computer works fine. 300 megabits per second looks great. Totally smooth. I can move my head, whip my head around really fast. No issues. This changes if you're using AirLink. So we'll talk about AirLink separately later on these things. If you change these bottom values at all, you got to restart the service, Oculus service. And if you restart the service, it'll disconnect the headset. You have to reconnect everything and restart the game. And also it will reset the settings like AirLink and stuff like that in the Oculus software if you reset that service. So any change down here requires that you change the service or you won't see the change. You can be making all kinds of changes in here. Once you start changing something down here, it kind of breaks it. It just doesn't do anything until you reset the service. So I'm going to go ahead and reset the service now because I've just been messing around and I don't really remember exactly what I hit. So I'll join back up and I'm going to pause the recorder when I do that. So this is the settings I want. It's time to reset the service and then I'll pause the recorder after that. Back to recording this view. This is right after I just set all the settings and restarted the service. The reason I'm recording this view is there's a couple things I forgot. So in the menu that you want to see from this view. So I'm going to put this in real quick. Okay, so I've just reset my view quick and Oculus Link is set up. The service is restarted. It shows up here. So I'm ready to go. Boom. We're back in here. I'm going to hit it desktop. And once you restart the service, you can go ahead and kill this debug tool. And if you're going to use AirLink, you before you even launched, you'd have to reset AirLink in here because it would restarting that service would have disabled this. Everything else should be the same. Now, the reason I brought you back to this view is because I wanted to talk about this button. This is how you'll leave and go back to your headset and then come back. But it's also the button where you'll control the bit rates for AirLink. So we'll get to this button later a little bit. All right, so I'm going to come back again in just a second. So you saw that button. You saw that we restarted the service. In the Oculus software, everything's the way it was. Resolution is still 1.0. But restarting the service, now you got to restart the debug tool. Go take a look at the debug tool and you'll see auto is set again. So you got to disable that. But all your other settings are the way they were. And if you had a resolution other than 1 in here, it would have left it. We're ready to go ahead and try IL2. There's no other settings we want to do in here. We've covered all these settings. So I'm going to set this to 1.255. You can set it to any resolution you want, and then we'll talk about SteamVR. So I'm going to go ahead and we're ready to launch SteamVR. Auto is off. Resolution is set. None of these other things change. Can kill this. Now I can start SteamVR. And you notice the world's aligned perfectly and seats centered perfectly. Mixed reality is not that good about that. Give it a second to start. Frames per second VR has to start. A couple other things. Now you notice I'm using the left controller here. I think you can see it in the recording. And the hamburger for that switches between the menus here. So if I click on the desktop and I look straight ahead and level and I press that button, it'll go back to the VR world. If I'm playing IL2, you'd see IL2 here. Whatever's in the VR world is your game. So it's devoid right now, but it could be IL2. And then if you hit the button, it switches to your desktop. You can go back and forth. And if you're looking somewhere, it centers the desktop wherever you're looking. So look straight ahead and level and hit the button twice, and now your desktop's centered. I put the hand controller down, and now I can mess with my mouse. While the SteamVR settings are up here, you can see I've got my frames per second VR running. I use a couple of tools to do what I'm doing. I overclock with MSI Afterburner, and you get my frames per second with Riva Tuner, and then I use hardware inf to record all my sensors to a log, and that's how I generally get my frame rates, but I like to look at the frame timers and things on here, CPU versus GPU. This is useful before you minimize it and start your game to check your VR settings from SteamVR. So I'm going to open this, go to settings, and it starts right at the resolution. Now we set 1.255. 1.255, you leave SteamVR's resolution at 100%, and that corresponds to a resolution of 2320, which is 1.255 times the normal Oculus resolution. The only other, you're never going to change this in here, which you would be in Vive headsets or in mixed reality, you would be changing this to change the resolution. Under developer, you can see I've got the current Oculus set as the current OpenXR runtime. Let's go back to the Oculus software here and go to settings. And let's find that. I don't think it's beta. Where is that? Yeah, it is. It says under beta, you can set the OpenXR runtime. Click that, and then in SteamVR, it uses Oculus. You want to set this to whatever headset you're using. Mixed reality, in the mixed reality portal here, has the same thing. Every time this is set differently and you come back to mixed reality, it warns you and says, do you want to use our OpenXR set time? Yes, you do, if you're using that headset. Oculus, you want to use it. So depending on which headset you are, you want to run this. At any time, you could click this to use SteamVR as the OpenXR runtime. But the headset companies tend to work with their lenses to deal with chromatic aberration and other things. I'm not sure why you'd want to use SteamVRs over theirs. They all tend to work together, especially in the HP Reverb. The Microsoft, Valve, and HP worked very closely to develop OpenXR and the software. for it. So, okay, so we've set the OpenXR runtime, we set the resolution. We're good. We can close this. There is no motion smoothing here. If it was a Vive or a mixed reality headset, you'd also have a choice under general here for motion smoothing. I do not set apps per application. I don't put the shortcuts in there. I only run a couple games. I'm running like in my sit down simulation right now. I run Condor and I run IL2. Rarely I'll run DCS, and DCS doesn't use SteamVR anymore. So that's where I'm at. Okay, so we're going to go close this. We can minimize this. And now we're ready to launch IL2. I'm going to go ahead and pause it because my system, it doesn't load super quick. I don't know how fast your system is. Let me just pause it for the load. So I launch it. Now it's loading. I'll go ahead and use the thumb button here to switch to the game. And now I'm going to Alt-Tab out and kill that recording. Pause it for a second while it loads. Okay, the game is loaded here. So let's go over my graphics settings. I run it on Ultra. The clouds look amazing, and even though I've only got a 1080 Ti, with the other settings and the resolution I run at, I can get 46 frames per second on the G2 and about 40 frames per second on a mission, like this is Combat Box missions. That's working for me right now. When I want to get 60 frames per second average or 50 plus frames per second, this is with crazy heavy clouds too, by the way, I'll drop it to balanced here and I'll leave everything else the same. So I didn't notice any difference lowering this resolution. It's the same. It's not even a frames per sec, 1 frame per second. Shadows make some difference. I like high shadows. Mirrors, I don't run with mirrors. They do make a difference. They slow it down. I like complex if I do use mirrors, like in a P38 or something like that. I like to see the bombs explode behind me if I want to use that, and you don't see that always if you lower the settings. I always run X4 to get the detail on the horizon terrain looking good to the distance. I like realistic look. I want it to look as realistic as possible. I don't care about spotting. I feel like if it, you know, if I'm removing something so I can see something easier, I feel like that's not what I would have had to look through glare. So I want it to be like it was. You know, it's just a game. It's just a simulation. It's very subjective. That's the way I like it. Horizon draw distance, not a big difference in frames per second here, so I crank it up to 150. Blurred landscape filter looks a lot more natural to me. The way it the edges meet at the horizon. The terrain roughness high, didn't see a big difference in frame per second. The gear seems to move more smoothly and more accurately. Grass quality ultra, again, not a huge difference, but it makes a difference when landing and taxiing. It looks better. Clouds on high, they don't look good no matter what, really. But if you put ultra, they shimmer a lot less at all the different settings, and high looks pretty good. I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to get away with extreme with it. Anti-aliasing is a big killer performance, and with the resolution of these headsets, you don't need a lot of anti-aliasing. I mean, you'd like it if you could get it, but it definitely causes a performance hit on MSAA. FXAA, on the other hand, is a post-process. It's not a big deal, especially at 2, and it does help with the edges a little bit. So it gets rid of shimmering, it gets rid of, and it doesn't really kill the detail of the pixels. So I use FXAA 2, and that gets rid of the buildings shimmering and grass and trees and other things shimmering, but also keeps the frame rates high. That's the compromise on this computer. I run it full screen because I don't want the mouse to get trapped, and that's the other reason I run this at the same resolution as my monitor. If it's running in a window, sometimes the mouse will stray out and then go to a different app, and then even though you're in VR in the game, you could totally lose control until you Alt-Tab and get the mouse back and make the game active again. So to minimize that possibility of that happening and the focus going to some other app, I keep this full screen and the right resolution, and I really haven't noticed anything in the performance. SSAO, I think it looks a lot better, and both SSAO and HDR on at the same time hardly affect like 1 or 2 frames per second on my rig at different. You can't even notice it, both of them. they're each like half a frame per second difference between the two of them. Sharpen, I don't increase the sharpness. I don't want more aliasing. I want it to look smoother and more natural. Although I'm sure that can help with some spotting. I also don't lower the gamma. I'm sure that can help with some spotting too. But I want everything to look natural. 4K textures and distance buildings on. There's a performance hit for distance buildings, but it's not huge. And it helps you with navigation to see things off in the distance at altitude. And then 4K textures, sometimes that even improves performance, excuse me. That's about it for my settings. That's how we're going to benchmark this. If I have trouble with this, I'll drop it down to balanced. And that's about it. All right, so I'm going to record. I'm going to pause it again, and then we'll record one of my loops that I benchmark with and show you how I benchmark. So I always run a mission, same mission every time, and it's got lots of clouds, and it's heavier than a quick dogfight on performance testing. It's very accurate to combat box, so that's what I tend to use. You might be stuck with me. I can't pause it. All right, you're going to have to live with the recording. Apologies. Close your eyes during this, you'll get a migraine. All right, we're in. So it's all set up and ready to go. Put the focus back on the game. All right, start it. Ready to do my little mission. I'm going to record it. This is how I do the benchmarking. So first thing is to do, I start recording here. You can see I am recording now, so we're just going to continue the recording. Then I go to hardware inventory, I reset it, and I run a new log. And I say what I'm doing if I'm doing something different. This is the same, so I'll just increment the number, run it exactly the same, and we'll log it. And for good measure, I'll reset frequently this, though I'm not using this to do the frames per second. Reset that, come back, go to there. All right. Go back to IL2. We're ready. All right, so I'm going to unpause it, and this is the benchmark run. As I do the same run every time, it's a pretty quick run. That way it's the same benchmark every time. Just going to go attack an airport real quick and do a loop around it. If I don't get shot down, I crash at the same point every time to make it similar. Clouds look really good. So you can see this is a pretty good cloud test for performance. Know we're coming. That was not good. And this is where I'd crash into the ground whether I survive or not. And that's the end of my loop. Kind of fun to watch them shoot at me here. Okay, that'll end the fruit loop. We'll check the frame rate. So first thing I do is I kill the logging. Then I'll go check that spreadsheet. So it's in my benchmarks. Clip the beginning, clip the end, get an accurate frame count, look at the average here. So with everything that going on, recording, doing all this stuff, it dropped from about 40, 41 to 37, but normally it would get 41. And that's the average, and I would always round up. If it's 0.5, I round up a frame. So we got 37 this time, but there's lots going on right now. This is a spreadsheet where I kind of take notes as I'm doing things, checking resolutions, running different things. So you can see I've run the reverb at a bunch of different resolutions, and I've run the Quest at a bunch of resolutions. So that's the first test. Now what I want to show you real quick is that I'm going to get out of SteamVR here. I'm going to keep recording. So exiting SteamVR like that exits the game for me. I'm back at my desktop in Oculus. You can see if I open Oculus Debug Tool, it's remembered my resolution, all the settings are the same. And here's what's cool. If I change this on the fly to 2.0, watch everything get sharper. I'm not sure if you can see that at 1080p, but everything did get indeed a lot sharper. Auto is still off. On the fly, I can change this. I don't have to reboot the service. None of this other stuff's changed. I can close this, come into SteamVR, and now SteamVR will launch. It'll be perfectly aligned. It's going to launch frames per second VR in a second. Center my desktop. There's frames per second VR. Go in here, and this is still 1.0, but the resolution has now jumped to that 3696 we talked about. Leave this at 100%, changed it to 2.0. Now this I never have to change this. I never have to change the settings in Oculus. I just changed the Oculus Debug Tool. The resolution changes. I'm now ready to play the game at that new super high res. Condor 2 would work perfectly at this high res. No hiccups at all. Go ahead and minimize this, and I can launch the game. I'm going to pause it and show you. You won't see the difference at 1080p. If I was recording 2560 by 1440p, you actually do get a really good idea of what the resolution in the headset looks like. And pretty much captures it one. I'm going to go ahead and pause this and start it up, just so you see the frame per second difference. Okay, we're back, and the mission's all loaded up. Going to go ahead and record a session. Super low frame rates, but very high detail, just to see what that's like. Bear with me. I know this video is super long. I'm going to put in chapter links to jump around to, and this is 3969. 696, actually. All right. All right, watch the frames per second. Where we were 40, we're now getting 20. I usually get 20, 21. But it is so sharp. I can see the individual degrees in the compass there, and I can read everything in the cockpit. It's perfect. Now, I would never play this way, but just for checking out the details in the clouds and benchmarking, that's why I do this. everything looks amazing, super sharp, so you're really in the distance. That doesn't look good. Sauerkraut for dinner. Wrong hand controller. Fun to watch the tracers come in. Alright, so we're still recording here. Sorry about how long things take. Kill the log, check the frame rate. This is our new one. That's why I clipped the beginning and the end, because sitting on the ground there, you don't want a bunch of that. You don't want a bunch of stuff before I start. So, obviously, you know, we started, it was about 18 frames per second here. And we ended, let's go right there, 18 frames per second average. And that's what I get at 3696, which is significantly above the default 1.0 for reverb. Reverb 1.0 is about 3096 pixels, and so this is 3696. Awesome. All right, so I will go ahead and let's kill SteamVR. And the last portion of the video here that I want to do is going to deal with AirLink. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at these settings with you before we restart. There's a couple settings we're going to have to mess with. So going into the Oculus tool itself, we have to set AirLink. That's all we got to do there. Then in the debug tool, we need to set this to 0. And that's it. These other settings can remain, and we can use any resolution we want reasonably to a point, but AirLink doesn't work as well, so you can't go as far. And it's definitely going to be softer and more compressed. I'm going to start it at 0 when I restart, and I must restart the service for this to work. So I'm going to hit the service here and restart, and then I'm going to go back into my other headset and record a little bit in there. And I'll join you back here in a second. So I'm going to go ahead and restart the service. And yes. Hi. Last time I record from this view, I promise, you just saw me blink the Oculus setting. Because we restarted the service, it turned off AirLink. So you got to go back into the beta settings, turn on AirLink before you can come here. And then once you do that, you should be able to go to settings here, go to experimental, make sure you turn on AirLink here. So AirLink is turned on in our settings under experimental. Then we go back here, we'll recenter our view, and hopefully we can pair this. It sees our computer. Yep, so we're going to pair it. Okay, we're ready to launch AirLink. AirLink is connecting, starting up. It starts up a little slower. We're here. We don't go to the desktop yet. Go back to this where you would leave it, And instead of just leaving it, you now have choices over bitrate. So you can choose dynamic and anything from 10 to 200 in dynamic, in which it'll determine the best bandwidth setting to set it at. Instead, I like to choose fixed and play with it and experiment with it and find what works. Now, when I was whipping my head about dynamically really fast, especially at the higher resolutions, up to 2.0 resolution, the above 150 was having it lag and lose frames a lot. So that was a performance problem. Once I dropped it to 150 with my mesh network, I have a mesh Orbi right in the room here with me. So whenever I reconnect my Wi-Fi, it's going directly to that one right by the PC. I'm getting 5G. It's as good as my link's going to get. It's strong bandwidth, very close, lots of throughput. So 150 is pretty reasonable, and that's what works for me. That as it disconnects. Generally, that's what works for me. I do not want to. Yeah, we can allow that. Okay, so we're still recording. We'll try that again. Actually, I'm going to redo my Wi-Fi here. And maybe it switched to a different one, because they can jump around. All right, so we're connected. We've got all the bars. Recenter our view. Airlink. Comes up. Good. We already discussed bandwidth here, so I'm leaving it at 150. You should play with it depending on your network. You may have to put this fixed amount somewhere else. And then, like before, we go back to the desktop. So now we're on the desktop here. I'm going to switch over to desktop recording at this point. So let me go ahead and kill this and come back after I pause. So... Okay, so you saw how to set up Airlink from the headset. Now you're looking at my desktop. Going back to the debug tool. Because we're controlling bandwidth with that bar button, this is all 0. Everything else stays the same. You can change your resolution here on the fly. So here's 2.0. Looks good. A little bit of lag as I look around, but it's not bad. And it looks really sharp. 1.255, I can play fine. Auto, I got to return that off, and then I can launch SteamVR. Going back to the Oculus app, just as a last reminder, when the servers restarted, I had to hit this before I could come into Airlink. Even if I set it in the experimental area, it wouldn't see if it's not set here too. It has to be set both places. Again, not changing resolution here at all. This is staying 1.0. In Steam, the resolution is staying 1.0. Let's just launch Steam here. And I'm setting it to 1.255, so it should be a little higher. So this is air-linked. Frames per second. VR is starting. Give that a second. There it is. SteamVR is started. Go to the SteamVR settings here. We can see 1.255. Resolution is 2320. And developer is still set to Oculus. We're ready to launch our game. I can go ahead and play IL2 and Airlink now, and I tested it yesterday. It worked fine. So your mileage may vary. It's a little bit softer, obviously, but it's not bad. And I still have it plugged in to keep the battery charged, but I could go completely wireless now and play IL2 just fine. Open Composite. So if you don't want to use SteamVR and you've got an Oculus headset, you can use Open Composite to make it run SteamVR games as if they think it's an Oculus, and it'll use the Oculus instead of using... it looks more like it's an Oculus native app than if it's going through SteamVR, so you don't go through SteamVR. To do that, I use this Open Composite, and it brings up this little window here, and that lets me switch back and forth. Currently, its status is to run in SteamVR. If I click this, it says, okay, now its status is to run in Open Composite. Then you can switch back and forth between the two of these. You can also hit this configure button, which is really nice, because then you can tell it specific apps that you've run while using this. You can say, you right-click on you and say, you're always going to be Open Composite. You're always going to be SteamVR, or pick what they are. Steam should always be SteamVR, frankly. If I'm using this app and running this at all, it's the only time this will work is if you're running this app. So it's the only time it steals the injection. So with that being the case, I always wanted to run IL2 to run an Open Composite if I'm doing that. This is OBS is my recording tool. I'll have that to be default. I tried recording like the mirror and other parts and stealing different things to run. The thing that you generally record with OBS is recording SteamVR. There's no good way to grab Open Composite for video grabbing, so it messes with my ability to grab video. So really, the reason I don't use Open Composite is because it doesn't allow me to grab video well. That's it. So I'm going to leave this like this and switch it to SteamVR. If I was to switch it to Open Composite and then run the game, it would open up in the headset as if it was an Oculus app. And then I wouldn't, that's how Condor 2 works. Condor 2 isn't available for SteamVR, and it only opens in Oculus, and I can't record it doing it that way. So I use my mixed reality headset just for that purpose for it, so that I can record. But then again, I use my mixed reality headset. I generally like the G2 better. But this is a heck of a deal, I think, this headset. Anyway, that's how you use Open Composite. Now, the interesting thing is when I tested it, it was maybe a few frames per second difference, like very little. So the performance people used to talk about gaining when you got rid of SteamVR, I think that all went away with OpenXR. So I'm going to launch SteamVR here. Once they went to OpenXR, I think they're pretty much using everybody's runtimes that are the same, the headset's runtime, and so you're not really gaining anything, I don't think, anymore, like you used to. Could be wrong about that. Let's see. Under settings, developer, this is what I'm talking about. So once they switch this from being SteamVR's own thing to allowing you to use the Oculus runtime or the mixed reality runtime for OpenXR, and they switch to fully OpenXR compliant, I think the benefits of Open Composite aren't what they used to be. I could be wrong about that. But because in SteamVR I'm able to record what I want to record, that's my other controllers floating in front of me. I tend to use SteamVR just so I can record what I want. That's it. So that's just a quick tutorial on Open Composite. You should try it, see if it works better for you, especially if you're not bothering to record anything. I guess that's it for this demo. Hope this was helpful. I know it's really long. I'll upload it to YouTube and then put in a bunch of chapter points and post it. Go ahead and try it out, please, and let me know what does and does not work for you guys, and then also what you do differently, and maybe we'll make a short amendment video that describes the differences of how other people are working and what they're doing differently, or things that we changed to improve it. All right. Thank you. Have a good one, guys. Bye-bye.